First of all, it is an honor for the OECD to be here, and I would like to start by saying happy birthday. My son is about to turn 10, and I hope not as many people show up for his birthday party. We started this morning with very inspirational addresses by Minister Astori and Morgan Doyle from the IADB, and I would like to thank both of them for this, and especially in this context, the IADB, who is a great supporter of the work of the OECD in this area, and I would like to recognize that. Now, Michael and I have been friends for many years, and it has been a pleasure to witness the immense progress in budget reform in Uruguay that has been made during the past 10 years, even going further back. What I think makes the Uruguay reforms more special than what we see in other countries is that there seems to be tremendous consensus about the reforms in Uruguay. I may be wrong, but that is my impression. And I think that is a tremendous achievement, because in many countries where we witness huge budget reforms being made, we see one government doing it, and it often being reversed by the following government. But here in Uruguay, you seem to have achieved a consensus about the way forward. Now, Uruguay has gone through many phases of budget reforms, most impressive, and perhaps the next phase of reforms is the role of line ministries in the budget process, which I have been asked to speak about. This is not a reform that I would say is necessarily common to all OECD countries, but the ones that the OECD considers the leading countries in this area have made this reform, the role of line ministries in the finance function. So, my agenda is to discuss the finance function in line ministries and what we call the modern finance model, and then from the countries that have already implemented this, which we consider to be the leading budget reformers in OECD countries, the lessons learned for an effective modern finance model. Now, the prerequisite for all of this is top-down budgeting. Uruguay has implemented this, but top-down budgeting comes in many varieties. Sort of at its basic, top-down budgeting is a fundamental shift in the functioning of the budget process and the role of line ministries. Number one, information asymmetries. No matter how strong, how big, how powerful the budget office is, a line ministry will always know more than the budget office about its programs. The second advantage of top-down budgeting is ownership of actions. That if it is perceived that the central budget office forced something on a line ministry, during implementation, the onus is, we told you during budget formulation this would never work, and guess what? It's not working. But it's now reversed. In top-down budgeting, you are the line ministry. You proposed this. So the Ministry of Finance said, you told us it would work. Make it work. And then, as Mark referred to, one of the failings of budgeting is incrementalism. Last year's budget is next year's budget. However, and I will allude to this further, however, if you give line ministries greater flexibility in how they do their budgeting, when something new comes up, they will not ask for just new money for this new initiative. The Ministry of Finance can say, the Budget Office can say, you have this huge global amount. Surely you can transfer money from one area to another to cover this new initiative. So top-down budgeting is also a way to avoid incrementalism. Now, ministerial expenditure ceilings, they're called caps in some countries, they're called envelopes. I'm sorry I didn't put in the Spanish version, but they come in varying degrees of flexibility. They are annual or multi-year in time frame. Uruguay is, of course, famous for its 5-year budget. The out years, however, are more flexible than in some areas than others. And it's a question of also, do you include entitlement or mandatory spending within the expenditure ceilings? In Uruguay, it's indexing, especially of salaries, is a big issue, and how to deal with that within a multi-year top-down budget ceiling is difficult. But the bottom line is that top-down budgeting is only feasible if line ministries are capable of implementing such a system of expenditure ceilings. We have had examples of OECD countries that tried to do top-down budgeting by devolving responsibilities to line ministries, but there was no capacity there, so it did not work. So it's important to realize top-down is not just Ministry of Finance saying to a spending ministry that you should take over this function. There has to be capacity in the spending ministry to do that. Now, this is an oversimplification, but in the conventional model, the central finance function in line ministries is largely technical and administrative in nature. The central budget office interacts directly with sectoral program units in line ministries. In what, again, modern finance model, there is a strong finance function in line ministries. There's a saying in some OECD countries, each ministry is its own finance ministry in a top-down budgeting world. And critically, for this to work, the central budget office does not interact with the sectoral program units in line ministries directly. It always goes through this strong finance function in line ministries. Now, this is another way to present this. If sort of the 4 areas of what we commonly associate with budgeting, one is technical financial administration. In the conventional model, that belongs to the line ministry. In the modern finance model, it can be mixed. Sometimes the line ministry continues doing this. In some cases, in some cases, the finance ministry continues doing this. In other areas, the line ministry takes this over. So it's mixed. Now, when it comes to fiscal discipline, in the conventional model, no role for line ministries. They were just looking out for their own. The more we can get, the better. In the modern finance model, it is their responsibility to adhere to their budget ceilings. In reallocation, same as before, if we need more money, we ask for more money. We do not consider reallocating from one area to another. In the modern finance model, that is the premise of top-down budgeting. You reallocate within your ceilings. And management of resources, the same thing. In the conventional model, line ministries had very little role, but in the modern financial model, they have the greatest role. Now, some critics say that the Ministry of Finance is giving up a lot of its power in this new model. But the experience of the countries that have implemented this shows that the cumulative effect of granting fiscal discipline, reallocation, and management of resources to line ministries actually results in better aggregate results than in a truly centralized model. Now, I will briefly go through each of these points that I made. In terms of fiscal discipline, the modern financial model, it fosters budget discipline within each ministerial ceiling. I'm talking in terms of the role of the central finance function in each line ministry now. It monitors budget preparation and implementation in the sectoral programs in each ministry to avoid overspending on the current or multi-year expenditure ceilings. It acts as an early warning system to identify potential problems and concerns. And a central finance unit in each line ministry is in a much better state to do that than a central budget office is. Now, when any expected overspending, it must trigger action. And if this is all focused on this being in the hands of the line ministry, the biggest thing is you know about it before. So the role of the central finance function is to discuss necessary policy corrections in each respective sectoral program to prevent overspending, discuss policy changes in other sectoral programs in the ministry to compensate and reallocate internally for the overspending within a ministerial total expenditure ceiling. And then there are, of course, cases of overspending beyond the total expenditure ceiling, and I'm happy to take questions of that along with Mark afterwards. But only a strong central finance function in line ministries can take this whole of ministry view. And of course, it needs to have a close interaction with the minister, which I will come to later. Reallocation. Having a strong finance function and top-down budgeting stimulates reallocation within each expenditure ceiling, from sectoral programs that are less valued to those that are more valued. And in most OECD countries, it is actually reallocating less with less, where to cut. But in other countries, and I believe Uruguay has been recently in a phase of growth, so this is not the key issue here. Now, it also creates fiscal space for new policy initiatives. As I discussed before, the hallmark of budgeting is normally incrementalism. If I want something new, I ask for more money. I don't look at what I already get. But in this model, it's you propose to the Ministry of Finance, we will reduce this amount in order to fund this new initiative. There is a high degree of trust needed between spending ministries and the Ministry of Finance in this model. Because the fear is if the line ministry proposes a cut, the finance ministry will say, great idea, we'll take the cut. Your new initiative, no. So there is a high degree of trust that needs to be established. In terms of reallocation, and this goes back to my previous slide on discipline, ensuring compliance with total ministerial expenditure ceilings. If one sector is going over, it is the responsibility in this new model for the line ministry in the first instance to reallocate within its ministry to fulfill its obligations vis-a-vis the total ministerial ceiling. And again, only a strong central finance function in line ministries can take this whole of ministry view. It needs very close interaction with the minister, as I will come to later. And the role of the Central Budget Office is brokering interministerial reallocations, allocations between ministries, and supporting overall political prioritization. Now, management of resources. Having devolved a lot of these issues from a central a central budget function to line ministries fosters more effective and efficient management of resources. It increases the managerial responsibility of budget holders in line ministries. I am not just implementing something that came from the Central Budget Office. I actually have power to decide what is good and what is bad. A key thing also in this model and what we have learned in OECD countries is one thing is to devolve things from the finance ministry to line ministries. Another thing is to devolve things within line ministries. That the budget holder as such may feel no difference because the central finance function in the line ministry has simply replaced the Ministry of Finance as the central organ. So it is also important in this model devolution within line ministries. And again, it informs decisions on reallocations because nobody knows more about your program than you yourself. Now, if I move into the second part of my presentations, which is lessons learned for an effective modern finance model. The first one is early and binding expenditure ceilings. It is establishing ministerial ceilings at the start of budget preparations. This may mean updating previous multi-year expenditure ceilings, which I believe is especially relevant in Uruguay. It may be reallocations among expenditure ceilings, or additions or reductions in total expenditures. It may require moving forward the budget calendar. If the fiscal year, the calendar year, then we at the OECD recommend sort of the single decision-making moment for the expenditure ceiling be in May. I believe it's done in June in Uruguay, correct me if I'm wrong. But it can be politically difficult. For politicians, I'm glad the minister has left, it is often easier to delay the most difficult decisions until the last minute. If I need to tell a minister bad news, why would I do it in May or June if I can wait a few months later? But for the system to work, there's also a change needed in the political culture, that these things need to be done earlier. And the ceilings, they need to be binding once they are established. If they appear to be negotiable, line ministries will focus their attention on increasing their ceiling rather than complying with the established one. So this is another political culture decision, that the ceilings need to be binding once they are established. Now, design of expenditure ceilings are different in different countries. It is, the most common is to have sub-ceilings for salaries, for other operating expenditure, for transfers, and for capital expenditures. Number 2 is avoid multiple expenditure ceilings for each minister. The larger the number of expenditure ceilings, the smaller the opening for reallocation for that minister is. One ceiling per minister is the optimal solution. In some cases, there are politically sensitive programs that are viewed in such a way that they are ring-fenced. I don't know how that translates, but they are put aside from everything, untouchable. It's the more you can avoid that, the better. And to echo Mark's words, avoid cross-ministerial expenditure ceilings. Follow institutional boundaries. The ceiling should be with the ministry, not with the program that may be administered by a number of people. As Mark said again, no one is responsible if everyone is responsible. And I can speak from experiences of OECD countries. There is not a single example in an OECD country where cross-ministerial programs work. It simply does not work. Budget holders, I put that in quotation marks, because for the central finance function in line ministries to be effective in its new role, sectoral units and agencies within the ministry should be the budget holders. They are the ones that incur commitments and order payments. That means that the central finance function can then perform, and more importantly, be seen to perform its role in a more neutral and objective manner. The central finance function serves as an interface with the budget office in budget policy making, budget formulation. This does not prevent devolving technical, financial, administrative functions to sectoral units. In fact, that would be the preferable option. Now, often associated with this is the institutionalization of program evaluation. Fundamental questions beyond outputs and results need to be asked. Why is this program a task of the central government rather than a lower level of government or the private sector? What alternative policy instruments could be used to achieve the same program objectives? What does each policy instrument cost? What would happen if the entire program would be abolished? This is spending reviews, in essence. There is very little incentive for line ministries to be critical if this is imposed from the outside. But in a decentralized manner, with a top-down budgeting system and a strong finance function in line ministries, this can be seen as an opportunity by line ministries to improve policies and reallocation and funding new initiatives. And the role of the Central Budget Office is primarily to stay in the background, provide a framework, general guidance, and not necessarily participate in it. This should be a way in this new environment for each ministry to take a close look at what it does, what does not work very well, what do we need to put money in, and how do we transfer money internally towards this. I pressed the wrong button. Now, the finance function within line of ministries and the Ministry of Finance. First of all, the finance function in line ministries in countries that have gone down this reform route, it varies greatly in practice, especially based on the devolution of technical, financial, administrative services to sectoral units. Is it the central finance unit that does this, or is it the role of the sectoral agencies to incur these commitments? What we've also learned is that establishing working relations between the new central finance function in a line ministry and central program units can be difficult. I said at the beginning that each line ministry, each minister is his own finance minister. From a finance point of view, this is very positive. From the perspective of many people in line ministries, this is not so positive. The position is generally, the person who heads this is a senior person who generally reports to the top civil servant in the ministry and enjoys the confidence of the minister. Now, the coordination with the Ministry of Finance. Of course, the finance function can only be effective if it cooperates closely with the Central Budget Office. The Central Budget Office must operate via the finance function in line ministries rather than directly with its sectoral programs. Because if you do so, you're undermining the finance function in sectoral ministries. We did a study at the OECD of who actually heads the finance function in line ministries, and surprise, surprise, most of them came from the Central Budget Office, Ministry of Finance originally, which perhaps reinforces the need to establish trust. In some cases, the Central Budget Office has a veto power over the appointment of the head of the central finance function in a line ministry. This is most notable in the Netherlands, where the sectoral ministries play an incredibly strong role in the budget process. And the Netherlands has a very small budget office, and it relies on the capacities of the central finance function in each ministry. And in order to do so, they have this veto power. It has never been used, but line ministries know that the Ministry of Finance has this veto power. And again, to reinforce the point that the Finance Directorate serves as the interface with the Ministry of Finance in budget policy, budget formulation, but not necessarily for it to devolve technical financial administration. You know, we have central accounting agencies, central disbursement agencies, central procurement agencies. So these things can happen, but that's the implementation stage. But at the budget formulation stage, all interactions between the Central Budget Office should be with the central finance function in line ministries. Now, you'll be glad to know this is my final slide. This is a major institutional reform. It requires an integrated package of measures for it to be successful. Medium-term expenditure frameworks, baselines, the whole gamut of budget reforms. You could simply not impose the central finance function on a budget process without other reforms. So it's just to highlight that. Now, what we have also found interesting at the OECD in our studies is that there is resistance by line ministries for these reforms. What do we gain? In the old system, if we want more money, we ask for more money. In this new system, if we ask for more money, we're told, find it yourself. But once the trust has been built that you can take money away from a program without the finance ministry taking it away and making it available to new programs within your ministry, the culture change is quite quick. And again, just to conclude on one thing, it's the relationship between the finance ministry, the central finance function in line ministries, and their relationship with the programs in each of their units is absolutely key. So I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I do apologize for speaking in English.